Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all our participants who are joining in from different parts of the globe. And we're glad to have some colleagues joining us in person here in the Japanese room of the Melbourne School of Design. My name is Reden Resho, and I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Informal Urbanism Research Hub here at the Melbourne School of Design. Let me begin this webinar by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where this event is being hosted, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Let me also recognize the members or leaders of other indigenous communities who may be participating in this webinar. Today's event is the 6th panel discussion of the University of Melbourne's International Research Seminar Series on Southern Built Environments. And today I'm delighted to be welcoming 3 wonderful Southeast Asian scholars who are going to engage with the theme, Learning Southern Urbanisms in the Time of COVID-19, Methodological Implications, Empirical Insights, and Ethical Dilemmas. Each speaker has about 12 minutes to present. We will then have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of all the presentations. So for our online audience, you may submit questions and comment using the Q&A button. And just for everyone, this is being recorded and we'll make the file available in the coming days. At this point, let me introduce our first speaker, a friend and a colleague, Pamela Kahilig. Pam is a cultural anthropologist who conducts research at the junctures of disaster, design, and development, and with more than 2 decades of experience in research and consulting work in Manila, Bangkok, and Kuala Lumpur. She's presently a PhD candidate at the RMIT University School of Architecture and Urban Design. Her doctoral research project titled Participation as Inhabitation, Designer Citizens Negotiating Post-Disaster Housing Reconstruction is an ecological examination of the processes through which fisherfolk inhabiting a small island rebuild amidst complex disasters, given limited access to material resources and political capital. Today, Pam is going to speak about what she calls patchwork ethnography within complex disasters, an ecological approach. So Pam, over to you.
Thanks so much, Reden. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so thank you again, Reden. And before I start, I'd like to pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which both the University of Melbourne and my university, RMIT, stand on. Okay, so I'm going to talk about patchwork ethnography, which is basically the methodology that I used in my thesis research. When COVID lockdowns were declared in the Philippines and in many areas around the world in March 2020, I was only 1 year into conducting, 1 month into conducting my field work. And I was gutted, I was panicked. I wasn't sure on how to proceed until I stumbled on the concept of patchwork ethnography quite close to my progress review session during that year. So I'm here to show my processes as well as my methodological and ethical reflections on using this approach. So this is my field site. It's a fisherfolk community in a small island at the confluence of Angat River and Manila Bay. It's a 4-hectare island on which about 3,000 fisherfolk or 700 families live. So the island is exposed to land subsidence in Manila Bay because of the lack of sustainable water sources. It's also exposed to sea level rise. Annual sea level rise in Manila Bay is about 13.5 millimeters per year. That's about 3 to 4 times the global average. It's also exposed to tidal inundation on an everyday basis. typhoon, storm surges, rainfall. So it's a multi-hazard context, especially since I also conducted my research during the pandemic. This is where I passed through by land travel on the way to the island. So the highways or the roads are located on very narrow strips of land, very close to fish ponds. So I was able to access my field site through my participation in a Harvard Humanitarian Initiative project on community resilience and leadership. And during the 1 month that we were able to conduct visits to the field, we were already advised by community gatekeepers to limit our research from around December to April annually, because high tide happens at night during this time. So it would be easier for us as researchers to visit during the day. During this time of the year, monsoon season, from around May to November, high tide happens in the daytime. And during this time, it would be difficult for vehicles to pass through land, much more for us to travel to our island site. And also, we would be a burden to the community if we were to conduct research during this time of the year, because they would be busy salvaging their belongings, fixing their fishing implements because of the impact of the floods. So even without COVID, we would also have a very limited time to do research within this research context. In March of 2020, as I mentioned earlier, Manila went into complete lockdown, and also surrounding areas in the Philippines, including the island. So fisherfolk on the island were only allowed to fish 3 times a week. And I also could not leave my place in Manila to physically visit the island. So I really had to think fast. I really had to revisit my research approach in the months that followed the declaration of COVID lockdowns. So I eventually came across Patchwork Ethnography by Gonell et al. 2020. So Patchwork Ethnography is a methodological and theoretical approach that's designed along short-term field visits. So it's an approach that acknowledges that ethnographic research is inherently fragmentary, because ethnographers try to synthesize across different sources. They try to synthesize across different positionalities of their interlocutors. But this fragmentation was particularly magnified during the pandemic. And patchwork ethnography, moreover, challenges the fixity, holism, and certainty that is attached to conventional ideas of ethnography. So from the standpoint of patchwork ethnography, ethnographic research does not have to happen in a long, continuous manner. But then patchwork ethnography does not sacrifice the commitment to rigor. So for patchwork ethnography to be conducted well, it acknowledges the standards of rigor in conventional ethnography, such as language learning, a commitment to thick description, and a commitment to knowing the cultural, political, and socio-economic context of the field site. So I wouldn't recommend this approach for researchers who are completely new to this research topic. And finally, patchwork ethnography acknowledges the entanglement of the personal and the professional. Conventional notions of ethnography evoke, this image of a lone, typically male researcher from the global north who have no family commitments or care responsibilities, and who are impervious to the risks and being exposed to the element in their field site. So in a way, patchwork ethnography is a feminist approach to ethnography, because it acknowledges relations of care, it acknowledges vulnerability, that researchers such as myself, are vulnerable to viruses such as COVID. I have my own comorbidities. I live with my mother who also has her comorbidities. So both of us were very careful to be exposed to COVID, and we would have been careful even without the lockdowns being declared. So patchwork ethnography acknowledges that, our personal concerns entangle with our professional commitments, and that, also our research participants are also vulnerable to other forces other than human intervention.
I think Pam is experiencing some network problem. So let's probably give her a minute to come back. And if she's unable to return within a minute or two, we'll proceed to the next speaker and then give her time again later. And this is part of the patchwork ethnography dilemmas of researchers in the Global South, how to navigate the very weak internet signal in different parts of the metropolis, particularly in Metro Manila. So I think we'll now have to proceed to our second speaker, and we'll get back to Pamela later. So let me introduce our second speaker, who is with us here today in the Japanese room. We have Dr. Ha Tai. Ha is currently a lecturer in landscape architecture at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology School of Architecture and Urban Design. His research focuses on space syntax, urban morphology, building topology, informal urbanism, place identity, smart city, and the Asia-Pacific region. Ha's topic today is titled COVID and Me, so very personal and professional, juggling high and low resolution research methods. So, Pam is back. So, Pam, if you could probably continue. Yeah.
Sorry for that. I'll share my screen again.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So as I was mentioning earlier, one of the key things that helped move this research forward was my identity point person. So my point person was a community health worker who was also reconstructing her family home on the island, but also had the advantage of living on the mainland, so I could communicate with her more frequently. Another aspect that really helped was my consultation with experts in ethnographic research in the Philippines and who have done ethnographic research in fishing communities. As I was navigating this uncertain context, they really helped me pay attention to the ethical and methodological issues of working with fishing communities. So it takes a lot for a remote ethnographic interview to push through. Several things have to come together. The mobile signal strength and the island has to be strong in the interview spot. I have to conduct my interview during low tide levels. And then, of course, because of the continuous flooding in the island, the elevation of the interview location is also a consideration. I cannot conduct interviews during typhoons or low pressure areas because that's too much disaster risk exposure for my research interlocutors. And then because I was working with a community health worker, I also had to work with her schedule within the community. Like, for example, she was helping out in COVID vaccinations. And then attention to the actual COVID conditions in the mainland and the research site, and of course the activities in the area. I was also conducting my research during in the latter part during the 2022 national election campaigning period in the Philippines. So that was also a consideration. So I have to go through several checklists on a monthly, weekly, and daily basis in order to conduct the interviews. So on the month of the interviews, what's most important is to locate in the tide calendar weeks where tide levels were low and therefore low risk for my community contact and research interlocutor. We also had to eliminate special occasions because there were fiestas, special masses. There are patron saints in the island that they pray to, so that the saints would watch over the fisher folk while they were out of sea, and there are celebrations connected to these. On the weeks where we identified were conducive to interviews, we had to look at the disaster risk and community health schedule, make sure there weren't any typhoons or upcoming cyclones or low pressure areas during this week, and of course work with the community contacts health schedule. On the day of the interview, the focus here is lived experience, because it's possible that the tide calendar reflects low tide levels, but on the actual day of the interview, there might actually be higher tide levels than expected. And then as I was also doing research during COVID and during election campaigns, there were times when we would schedule an interview with a research interlocutor or with a homeowner, but then government officials would suddenly show up to campaign or suddenly show up to distribute COVID assistance. And then, I would have to go through the entire cycle again in order to reschedule interviews. So it was a very challenging process, but with careful planning, it's possible to schedule remote ethnographic interviews in this context. This is an example of the tide. So the red circles represent weeks with high tide level. So basically any tide level 3.6 feet and up would be considered high risk. And the green areas with green, marked by green, indicate lower tide levels, which means they were conducive to interviews. There's an area marked in yellow. So it might be possible, it's about 3.3, 3.5 tide level, but then all the other considerations that I brought up earlier would come into play, such as whether the tide was, increasing or receding, or whether, the elevation of the interview site was ideal for conducting interviews and free from disaster risk. It helped to triangulate remote interview data with visual information, such as photos, in order to establish normal or typical flooding conditions in the island. So these are photos of the island taken on August 4 of 2020. You'll notice that the flood level is knee-high, and at this level, the people in the island would still walk normally. This is a tide level in an adjacent town. At waist level, people are still, having a coffee and eating meals on their roof. So there are 3 ontological shifts involved here. The first concerns, my definition of the field, not as a physical place, but a set of relationship. The second would be the temporality, my approach to temporality. I felt pressured by, of course, being an international scholar. I had deadlines to meet, milestones to meet, but, things happen when they happen in this environmental context. And I had to learn, to go with the flow, so to speak, and frame my temporality around environmental movements. And then, of course, reframe ethnography from long-term uninterrupted fieldwork to my entanglement with the livingness of the world. And that was very hard to do, that last bit, being cognizant of my livingness with the world, when you're doing research in 4 concrete walls, and don't go out of the house. So part of my unlearning process was to take up photography. I had an SLR camera and my mobile phone, and I would just force myself to go out our balcony and our garden and take pictures of my environment and feel the wind, feel the rain, and imagine how this kind of environmental conditions would play out in my field site. It felt a little forced in the beginning, but eventually I was able to embrace it. So thank you very much for listening. I guess I'm here to say that it's possible to conduct ethnographic research in a context of complex disasters, but it requires a certain degree of unlearning and reflexivity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pam, for that very insightful and ethnographically rich presentation. So we'll now proceed to Ha. As I mentioned, Ha is currently a lecturer at the RMIT School of Architecture and Urban Design, and is going to talk about how to juggle high and low resolution research methods. So,
Okay, thank you very much. Share my screen. Okay. All right, just leave it there. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Raiden, for the very kind introduction. I will need to position myself in these presentations by saying that I have completed my PhD before COVID. So essentially, my PhD have a very little thing to do with COVID. But since I got a position, an opportunity to move forward with the postdoctoral research at MIT, and the only reason that they allow me to do the postdoctoral research is because of my research methodology, framing around urban morphology, mapping, space syntax, ethnological research. But essentially, I was locked inside my room, and I can't do all those things. So being fears of losing the positions, being fears of having the fund cut, and funding cut is a very popular term we hear all the time in 2020 these days. So that is really, really good opportunity for me to kind of reflect on what I have did during that context, to recall all the fears as well as all the scary memory that I have gone through. So thank you for providing that opportunity. I think for all of us, it's really, really easy to recall the thing that we have been, because 2020 is not very long time ago. The cool thing is that right after the outbreaks being announced, everybody, all the researchers are trying to generate as much as possible, disseminate the research finding and exchange the knowledge in order to inform policies and inform other practice in order to respond right and manage the pandemic effectively. And I believe that from my positions, being able to do qualitative research is still significant and important in order to generate new knowledge and describe and explain the impact that the crisis create on everybody's life. And particularly when I still look into the global south context, that is very poor data kind of environment. How can I do this? I don't know, because at that point, there's a very little experience. Nobody has much experience about that. But I believe that quantitative research still can help in terms of suggesting ideas, highlight the possibility, highlight the necessary to address certain challenges that arise during the context. So I decided to go with the quantitative research, and I need to open my doors and thinking about more possibilities and options. But being able to conduct a quantitative research during the pandemic is really a big challenge. It requires a lot of adaptations, I found for myself, in order to ensure the qualities of the quantitative research. Because in an ordinary quantitative research endeavor, the researcher usually has to spend extensive amount of time as well as intensive effort in order to build trust, to create the close proximities with the research participants and with the context. And both those elements are impeded during the COVID-19 context. I found two major challenges, that is time constraints and physical distancing. So at that times, I was still in Melbourne, experienced all dance requirements and guidelines about being locked inside the room and 5 kilometer radius. So conducting research in Vietnam is essentially impossible at that time. But luckily, during my PhD, I have already established an existing network with pupils in Vietnam who helped me a lot with my PhD. So my PhD is all around studying the urban forms of Hanoi, but more importantly, look at the impacts of urban forms in Hanoi on people's life. And I look at how urban forms in a very organic city like Hanoi can influence the ways in which people run informal business, particularly home-based business. So I have a lot of network with home-based business owner. I got their trust because it's really important to get their trust so that they let me inside their house, look at how they cook things, prepare things, and sell them not illegally but informally. So I think I need to push that. But it's really, really hard to do that during time constraint context because I need to design the research faster, recruit people quickly, identify useful contact, and go through very, very quick data analysis. And one of which is collaborate with other people to do that. And in order to deal with the shallowness of the information, we kind of extend. We kind of collaborate with other people to expand the scope of the research and make it better that way. So limited in-field time is also another challenge because I'm not there. I have to recruit other people to do that for me, to do the field research for me. And the thing is, the two solutions both goes again the traditional and conservative research qualitative standard. So that is one thing. The second thing is physical distancing. Field trip is considered as non-essential trip. So essentially, field trip is illegal. Interview and observation equal with group gatherings in crowded areas. So again, it's illegal. How can I rethink certain principles in order to conduct the quantitative research and mapping again? And how can I seek alternative research methodology in order to still gather data, but mostly centered around technology support method? How can I use research assistants and communicate with them effectively in order to gather and capture the information? But whatever I do, I realize the potential, like the depth in the research, because I'm not in the environment. I can't pick up the non-verbal clue, and everything that I can see is framed, with that little camera like that. So luckily, the internet connection is in Vietnam generally is not that bad. So my research participants can easily hold the phone, and usually I instruct them to hold the phone next to their chest like this and walk around. So it looks like they are doing something normal. It is still ethical though, because it's public space, and they can just hold the phone on the chest and walk around and record and say whatever they see to me. So that is a kind of how I gathered information during the social distancing period. So what I'm saying, juggling between low resolution and high resolution data, I assign the terms. I think about secondary data as a low resolution data because they are not necessarily address my research question, particularly when I kind of interested in fine-grained, small scale details of everyday life. So I started my research during that times with a lot of desktop-based research and use that data to inform the designs of my research questions and research methodology, as well as inform me with how to recruit participants and assistants. So information like this appears everywhere in Vietnam during that time. Map showing locations of cases, map showing the location of available informal and formal marketplaces that being accepted by local authorities. Map like this also built and created by people in Hanoi and share with each other via Facebook, all kind of social media platform. So I personally built for myself a series of locations that people can potentially visit. And in order to scrap that much data, I learned Python and use a quite simple code in order to scrap, fetch data from internet. So all those data is raw, but they are useful in terms of letting me know what happened where and how I can connect with my existing networks and ask them to do things that I want them to do. I got an opportunity to test my research methodologies because I got an opportunity to teach a seminars at IMITs in which I can ask my students to do some mapping work, and they are all over the world. Some of them are in China, some in Melbourne, also locked in the room. So we use this seminar as an opportunity to test the various ways to map things without visiting the place, and use available open source data and stitch them together and still make sense of the data. So the map that you see over there, the first one on the left is the map created by fetching the data from OpenStreetMap. So it's really simple things that we can do with Python and put it in the spicy tag analysis, and we can predict, the movement flows as well as we can see the connectivity. And the second map is the one that generated by overlaying a series of spatial data in GIS. And the map, the black map on top over there, is the map that students use Google Street View in order to move around and identify activities, pre-COVID, of course, but it's kind of thing that we can do, right? And they also use Google Street View to capture a series of things that reflect to the Chinese identity. So we look at global Chinatown. We look at about 40 Chinatowns, and I know that there are some information available. I know that there are some methods that can work, and I know that's something that I can use for my own research. And then apply that to Hanoi. I'm lucky enough to have an opportunity to collaborate with Redens and other scholars at MIT and in Philippines. So I just realized that the kind of data, the kind of desktop-based research that I did is not enough. And it's looked like some in-person data collection is unavoidable. So I asked my research participant to inform me, to tell me what happens in Hanoi at that time beyond the thing that is reported in the social media and newspaper. We conduct a series of mapping workshops, but one-to-one, and then I kind of draw as they talk, and then I show them the map that I did and say, hey, do you look, that's correct? I try to identify a series of informal trading places that that people can come to and purchase goods. And then I identify a series of connections between either small market, medium market, and wholesale market, as well as the place that people can source the food and transfer and transport it to Hanoi. Snowballs and opportunistic sampling is really, really important in order to recruit participants, because everybody's feared, so they are very willing to share. They have a lot of times, so they are very happy to connect me to other. So I had a lot of one-to-one and virtual interviews with people. I know more people, but everything that they said had to be validated, because those are very like a small piecemeal sort of approach. So I need to stitch them together and validate the thing that they said through internet search. Another research methodology that I find useful is video diary. So this is one example, screenshots of a video diary that I asked one of my research assistants to do, again, by holding the phone, walk around, do the shopping as usual, because at that time they had to have a ticket in order to visit the market. So after they hold the ticket in their hand it over to the officer, and then they enter the market and start filming things like this. They tell me what they are doing, how many people wearing masks, what are social distancing practices people are doing in this context. So anything, even the rocks on the street, it tells something. I don't know, so lots of information. And that is the scary thing at that time, because I was kind of flooded in gigabytes of videos. I can't purchase hard drive because JB Hi-Fi didn't open. But anyway, yeah. So that is a kind of research method that I use in order to collect the first-hand data or high-resolution data. Again, there is a seating presentation, so I will wrap it up like here. there are several challenges to the research methodology that I employ and push it further and develop further from the PhD methodology that I've got. But essentially, there are challenges, but also the opportunities. I find that virtual research method alter the relationship between myself as a researcher and the research participant, but they still can generate in-depth exchange with them. Interview with vulnerable people were shorter, but still substantial than face-to-face interview, because in the face-to-face context, people are really busy. They're running around doing a lot of things. And then I kind of, find a gaps between their times and ask questions. But when they sit in front of the computer, in front of their phone, they can tell a lot of things, they can say many, many things, and they are very, very comfortable with doing and sharing personal details. I find that virtual interactions can be a good one, and I still prefer that, as like we're still having hybrid session here, I was still doing virtual interview, but I believe that in-person data collections is really important and critical to research. And traditional qualitative research process usually involve the development of social relationship and trust, which is really time consuming and costly. Fast track qualitative research, as I just explained earlier, is very potential, but there are other costs that go beyond monetary, I believe, because there are many things missing and we can't pick up during that research process. That is all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ha, for that very interesting presentation and for showing us the strengths as well as the challenges of navigating the quantitative and qualitative research methods. So we'll now proceed to our third speaker, Dr. Lia Asi Roro Porwaningrum. Roro is currently a lecturer at the School of Architecture, Planning, and Policy Development at the Institute Technology Bandung in Indonesia. Her research interests include the intersection between architecture and the issues of identity, politics, and locality. She's also interested in design approaches and methods, particularly in how architects translate what is perceived as identity and locality into built form, amidst the political tension surrounding these very complex issues. Rara's presentation is going to focus on the race to Mandalika. Is tourism a post-pandemic recovery? So very exciting. Roro, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Raiden, for a very lovely introduction. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Raiden, and everyone there. Hello, my name is Roro. As mentioned, I'm in Indonesia, a lecturer in ITB. And now this is actually my ongoing research. And now I will present it with title "The Race to Mandalika: Tourism as a Remedy Post-Pandemic." Probably this is more like empirical insight compared to what Pamela and Ha already did. So if you're not familiar with Mandalika, Mandalika is located in Lombok Island. That's next to Bali. That's why it has been planned to be a tourism destination since 1989, and it became part of the Kawasan Ekonomi Khusus or Special Economic Area since 2014, and it became the 10 new Bali and also 5 super priority destinations. There are implications in becoming a special economic area because it means that the central government directly manage and decide everything related to the area by appointing a state-owned enterprise. And it means that regional government has very limited authority in planning the area. This is a brief timeline. So we started in 1989, where the LTDC started the land acquisition using foreign loan, but failed to pay the debt. And then that's why in 2008, the government took over LTDC's asset. But the problem is between those times, local people started to reclaim and reoccupy their land. And that was the start of the land problem that is still going until now. And if you see 2014, ITDC proposed Mandalika as part of the KEK, or Special Economic Area. And in 2019, they started to build Mandalika Circuit. So Mandalika is proposed to be a sport tourism in Indonesia. And they held a World Superbike in last year, November 2021, and also MotoGP in March 2022. This MotoGP was narrated as like the igniter, the start of the comeback for the tourism sector in Mandalika, like a remedy post-pandemic. And they have this optimistic view because they already signed 10 years contract with Dorna. Dorna is the license holder for MotoGP, and they will have another GT World Challenge Asia in October, and then so on. But then aside from this tourism plan, there has been land disputes between the people and the government. And even the UNHR, United Nations Human Rights, claimed that there has been human right violation, serious human right violation by aggressive land grabbing, and then forcing eviction of indigenous people, intimidation, and also threat against human rights defenders. So actually Mandalika's story is also have the dark side, but I'm not gonna focus on this part, but I want to talk more about the tourism sector that has been very centralized in planning and management. Although ITDC as the enterprise that is appointed by the central government, they mentioned that they're already using a participatory method, but from my empirical finding, the local people said that they feel that they were not invited in the planning process, and they are not informed of any development plans. So basically they don't know what the government would do with the area. And also they say that there has been a central government interest heavily play in its development. For instance, they're problematizing Jokowi's statue. Jokowi is our current president. It is statue, if you see the picture, it's statue of Jokowi riding motorbike. They said why it has to be Joko Widodo, why don't they put Putri Mandalika statue or any local figures in the area. And then they also problematized that this decision making was directly from Jakarta, and including all the committee involved was imported from Jakarta. Including the people that actually take part in the organizing of the event of the MotoGP event. That's why local stakeholders participate very low, and this makes local government confusion because the long coordination line, there has been discordance in managing the event. And this caused very bad traffic management, crowd handling also, because the central government brought people from Jakarta to Mandalika to do this crowd handling and everything. And also even the wage management in the event was done by people from Jakarta. So basically local government only get income from the tax and retribution from the amenities around the area, not inside the area. So they don't have any authority inside the area of ITDC. And it's also, they also mentioned there has been waste management and landfill problem because like central government only picked a place to be a landfill for Mandalika, but then they developed it, but they don't really pay attention on how the infrastructure of, how to bring the waste to that landfill and everything, and the local government have to provide it. And they felt like they're not ready for that. That's what local government said. And also about the underwhelming target realization, in the national media, the government say that there they were accommodating local businesses. They mentioned more than 1,000 micro, small and medium enterprises included in the event. But local people said that the stall was very expensive, which 40 million for 3 days, with very low revenue. Some of them even mentioned their revenue is lower than 5 million. And no loading area and no car pass for sellers. That's why they had to bring by hand all the goods they were selling from the parking lot to the stall that was 1 kilometer away, and lack of communication causing big losses for the sellers. And then the problem is stalls were located away from visitor pathway. That's why it's very low visitor in that day. The exhausted visitor do not want to walk around because of the overcrowded entrance and exit way, and all of this causes big losses for the local businesses. And also other governments claims that the region got exceptional income, but what I heard from the people that the local businesses and hotel during MotoGP was even lower. The income was even lower than during the World Superbike that held before MotoGP. And it was only 3 days hype, and then the number of visitors plummeted. And they say that the event only attract travelers who stays only during the events, and not the tourists who seek leisure and tend to spend more time in the area. And that's why we can see underwhelming tourism effect after the event. And other government's claim is the tourism sector is growing in Mandalika, but what I saw during my field work, there was very low hotel occupancy after the event. Even in my hotel, it has around 200 rooms, only less than 5 occupied in that day. In that day, I stayed in that hotel. So local tourists only come to take photos in front of the statue, in front of the signage of the circuit. And then very few national and international tourists I saw, and also empty local stall businesses. And I will show the picture later. And I talked to a local tour guide and also tourism agency, and they said that many visitors say they regret coming to the event and will not come back for the next event. So there has been tourism problem in the community. The first is the debt problem. So because the government have this very promising narrative or a promising campaign of this MotoGP and all the events, some of the local businessmen try to bet their money on investing or buying something using probably credit installment, but then because they don't really comprehend the development plan, and suddenly it was postponed or stopped, the credits going, the debts going, but they had no income. So many of them have this kind of debt problem. And also I found that very limited job opening for local people in the area, because for the event, the recruitment opened by central government in Jakarta. And that's why I mentioned that many people, they brought so many people from Jakarta to the event, to take care of the event. And also what's interesting is job vacancies for the chain hotel were also open in Jakarta. And then, so it makes unclear future for people that actually jump into tourism sector. And I can see that because probably lack of tourists, local seller became a bit pushy, like they persuade a bit annoyingly for me, because I always say no, but they keep, pushing me to buy. But that is actually understandable given the situation probably. And although aside from this race thing, there has been social problem in the area, because people say that they have less attachment to the area due to excessive modernization in the area. And this is the Kuta Mandalika beach. Development has changed natural image of the beach, and people say that the promenade design is too modern. And what interesting is that the promenade is gated and guarded. So people feel like this is not their, no longer their beach. This is ITTC's beach. That's why people start to lose attachment to the beach. And also the modern development of the beach make traditional ritual look dirty. There is a Made Mare ritual where local people, traditional community gathered and camped around the coastal area. But they say that this ritual contaminate the beauty and cleanliness of the beach, and ITTC pushed them to, to comply with ITTC's requirement if they want to stay in this beach. And even ITTC requested to the region to forbid this ritual inside the ITTC's Mandalika beaches. Other problem also related to tourism is tourism has attracted many locals to leave their villages and move to the center of attraction, which is in Mandalika. It means that there has been a shift in the culture and social pattern of the community, and there probably might compete with a big investor that's planned to come. If you see in the right side, that's the claim that so many investor will come to the area. And then this putting them at risk if the tourism plan is not well executed. So this is my reflection to end this. I'm asking myself also, why does the government still championing tourism? Because we know that tourism is proven fragile under unexpected and sudden changes like COVID-19, like what we saw in Bali. If there's an eruption, suddenly all the tourism stops. Is there any option for Mandalika's economic development other than this sector? And also, whose interests are served in the project? Who would gain profit when investors come? Does what happened to the local people during the MotoGP reflect the future development of Mandalika's tourism? And also the last bit is, what is the position of local people in this tourism development? Because we see that after post-COVID, there has been higher hopes from the local people for the economic improvement. So what should they do if this tourism plan does not work as planned? Probably that's from me, Raden. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Roro, for that another very empirically rich presentation. So, okay, so we now have about 6 minutes to have a free discussion. So if you have comments or questions,
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to explore a little bit with Laura the environmental sustainability implications of the research site that you worked at. You touched on the waste management problems, but in many ways, tourism is environmentally unsustainable. And I might point out, for example, you have at the local level motorbikes and cars spewing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And then perhaps so far it's a blessing in disguise that you haven't attracted a lot of tourists nationally and internationally, because if you start doing that, people, probably most of those tourists will fly in, and airplanes are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. So any thoughts along those lines?
Roro?
Yeah. Thank you. I cannot see the face, but
Yeah, that's okay.
give me the question. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree that I think tourism is unsustainable environmentally, and I agree that there will be massive changes in Mandalika if Mandalika become like Bali, like full of tourists. I think that the development in Mandalika right now is already too modern, and people say that it's not natural anymore, and it was blame of why people don't really want to go to Kuta Mandalika again, because they actually seek the natural environment. About the gas problem, I think I talked to one of the decision maker. I cannot translate it, but there is the one who has the regional planning, decide on the regional planning. They didn't mention at all about any environmental damage or anything. I heard the issue of this waste management from one of the lecturer in one of the university there, that actually engaged with the people that actually taking care of the landfill, because the initial landfill was a bit far from Mandalika, and because Mandalika was planned to be the tourist attraction, the central government suddenly pinpoint a place, and then the local government have to, you know, prepare everything, because that's the problem with the KEK, the special region thing. Everything is decided from centrally, and the local government have to comply with whatever the central government say. So yeah, in my last fieldwork, I haven't touched on that, but that would be something I would probably look at in the development of this research. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Roro, for your response. So for our online participants, if you have questions, just use the Q&A function to type in your even feedback comments for our presenters. Anyone else? Okay. If you could also introduce yourself before you ask your questions, that would be good.
Hello everyone, my name is Bhuvneshwari. I'm an international student studying my master's in development studies. This is my first semester, and I'm from Sri Lanka. My question is to the second presentation. It's like really interesting, like how your research methodology and everything you were adopting during the COVID-19 and like snowball sampling and this thing, and also interesting to see the video diary with that. So my question is like, after the data, everything, how you validated your information about, I'm curious about to know in the COVID pandemic situation, how can we do the validation of our findings and before coming to a conclusion or recommendation? Thank you.
Yeah. So, thank you so much. It is not easy to validate somebody's experience because we are collecting pieces of information about how people deal with COVID, particularly how small scale, micro scale entrepreneurs deal with COVID and navigating through all those restrictions and still find the gaps, either spatially and legally, to run their livelihood. So I'm not trying to validate their experience, but I'm trying to validate the kind of information about the phenomenon that they have explained to me. For example, they said that they gathered food from the outer suburb, and they got the connections. They build connections with people who have trucks, who have who are fully vaccinated, and who has right to visit to get through the checkpoint. So that kind of information needs to be validated because I want to draw that network. I want to find out that network, and I want to report that network in my publication. In order to do that, I need to triangulate the information that they provide to me by taking it as a clue and asking other people, do you aware of this like this? And sometimes it comes to the point where I need to even ask people at the checkpoint that how many trucks you see passing through this checkpoint, where they come from. And that reveals a lot of other things, because I got several people, so some of my ex-students actually doing volunteer works and serving Hanoi's annual release during that time. They come to the rural area, they support the farmers with gathering the crop. They support people with picking up fruits and packing them and sell them in Hanoi, because all those normal connections or the chains of practice are were broken during COVID time. And some other new players actually jump in and do that. Luckily, I found some of them, and that snowballing method allowed me to extend that networks and triangulating the thing that people told me about.
So you were conducting those things through like online.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So the little that cam that people plug into their truck provide me evidence about they actually visit the field doing things. That was really generous in terms of sharing with me those footage. Yeah. So yeah, that comes with a lot of data. Yeah. I don't believe I have time to watch them all, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thanks for the important question and for the response. It's already 3:02, but we have one question online. So we'll probably get to that question before we wrap up and end the discussion. So the question is for the first presenter, and let me just read it out. My name is Manas Murthy, international PhD student at the University of Oregon in the US. I'm curious about the experience of the first presenter and even others as international students in different disciplines with regard to fieldwork support, specifically how their host institutions or departments supported or not their intermittent and interrupted fieldwork throughout the pandemic. So I will probably invite Pam to respond to this because we don't have time to hear from Roro and Ha. So Pam?
Okay, well, I had a lot of support from my department, my supervisory team in particular. We had meetings every 2 weeks so I could keep them updated of the field conditions and receive advice. And obviously this was a protracted research. It took longer than I expected. So I've asked for several extensions, I think 3 extensions already. And, and that came with both, the time extension and the financial support as well. So yes, I mean, it's possible to do this, but again, I think universities who encourage and invite students to do disaster research need to take into consideration that more and more we're dealing with complex disasters, multi-hazard contexts, and that might have implications on, the traditional research timelines that PhD and higher education students in general are exposed to, and I think that needs some reconsideration as well.
Thank you, Pam. And at this point, let me thank again our 3 panelists, Pam, Ha, and Roro, for their very insightful presentations. And thanks as well to our in-person and online participants for joining us today and for posing those really relevant questions. The recording of the session will be available on MSD and Infer websites in the next few days. So we will email you about when it's available. Just final announcement, our next webinar. So again, this is a series. So the next one will be on September 14, and we will have some colleagues talking about African urban built environment, inequalities, and resilience. So we'll have some African scholars presenting on this very important theme. So guys, we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thanks again for joining us today. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.